which is the worst single decision in history ever made by a person. Mao Zedong. Pest campaign. He basically told his nation to take pots and pans to kill all the sparrows. However, the ecosystem was disturbed and the locust population skyrocketed. Seeds. He thought that planting seeds 1 meter in the ground would result in greater roots and better harvest. He also thought that putting tons of seeds in one compact area would cause a better harvest. All the seeds died, however. Around 30 million or so died from famine under his rule. Hey, look at the other nations industrializing. Let's smelt all our metal to build better infrastructure. What? It creates pig iron, which is super unstable and impure, therefore being ultimately useless? Oops. Mao. The more I read about Mao, the more baffled I am. He seems like not just an incompetent ruler, but just like a straight up stupid man. In his youth, Mao briefly worked in the library of a university and was mocked by the students there for being uneducated. He held that grudge for a hell of a long time, as he basically banned higher education. When he came to power, there was a 10-year period when literally nobody in the country was allowed to enter college. Yet my grandparents were sent directly to the farm after school. No college for them. The decision by the Scottish to invade England during Black Death must be up there. Alan Savory. Link in description. The ecologist who killed 40,000 elephants because it was believed that grazing was causing the desertification of Africa, only to find out later that elephants were essential to prevent desertification. In a thread filled with all sorts of villains and dumb fucks, this is the one dude who's making me disproportionately mad. You'd be happy to know that he learned from his mistake and went on to create an elephant sanctuary. Ike. Now you see me sequel not being called Now You Don't. Oh man, I've been saying this for ages. Eastman Kodak deciding not to go forward with their own newly invented digital cameras and instead sticking with film because it made them so much money at the time. Isn't the real shit decision that the guy who invented the digital camera in 1975 at Kodak wanted to let Kodak patent it, and they said nah, who's going to get into these things? I got married in 1990. I remember our wedding photographer explaining the direction of photography and the coming extinction of film. I figured he must be crazy, and I doubled my investments in desktop calculators instead. The guy that sold the bottling rights for Coca-Cola for $1 and never even made the guy pay the $1. Link in description. Not really bad, since it was the Coca-Cola company itself that sold the bottling rights and it certainly helped popularize their product. Maybe not the worst, but maybe Ronald Wayne. He was a co-founder of Apple along with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1976. Just 12 days after forming the company, he sold his shares for $800. He owned 10% of the company, which would be worth $80,000,000, 80 billion today, semicolon. Source, link in description. Don't know how accurate this is, but the story still stands. Regardless of the exact numbers, it's accurate enough. He held a large enough stake in Apple that would have rendered him one of the richest guys ever. He sold it for so little. In a later interview he stated that he doesn't let the decision haunt him, given what he knew at the time. I think that's the only perspective one could take without going insane. That's what I tell myself about not buying a house in 2012/2013, but it still makes me want to cry sometimes. Same thing with me and Bitcoin. Cashed out at 600, breaking even with what I spent on equipment. A year later, 10k. Maybe the worst business decision ever made was by Xerox with their Alto computer. Xerox invented the graphical interface modern computers use. Desktop, folders, copy/paste, etc. They basically invented the modern computer in the 70s. But the problem was, the people in charge at the time were businessmen without any technical knowledge, so they didn't realize what they had. They did nothing with it and gave it away to universities and showed other companies. The famous story is that Steve Jobs saw this and within 5 minutes realized this was the way computers would work in the future. He copied it. Because Xerox didn't patent their invention and didn't do anything with it, and the rest is history. Xerox could have been Apple or Microsoft, or both. They could have had a monopoly on the entire PC industry. Almost every company uses Windows in their offices. I think 80 or 90% of consumers uses Windows. That could have been Xerox. They had the tech maybe 10 years before anyone else. They could have been the most valuable company of all time, but they just gave it away. It wasn't stolen. It was licensed for 100,000 shares of Apple stock, pre-IPO, and lead to the Lisa in 1983, a commercial flop, before the company managed to get back on its feet and make the original Macintosh a year after. Robert Bullard, one of the guys who discovered Titanic, says that his biggest regret is that he and Jane Louse Michel didn't bring a piece of the Titanic up with him when he first discovered it in 1985. At the time, they didn't want to disturb the wreck and leave it pristine, but if they had done so, then they would have been able to claim legal ownership of the wreck under international maritime law, and therefore more control over it. Because they chose not to do that, everyone and their grandma is free to take artifacts and pieces of the wreck, and this makes preservation impossible. Who's really out there running private souvenir grabs on the Titanic? James Cameron, probably. Radcliffe Line. The process to divide India and Pakistan boundary in 1947 was done hastily and without major considerations to local populace religion. Radcliffe was not a geography guy and majorly messed up the process. Millions died. Link in description. Close bracket. I'd say the partition of the Levant, Middle East, was way worse. Arbitrarily drawn by people who knew nothing about the region. I once read something similar to, backquote, when you see a straight border, you can assume it was drawn by someone not living there. It makes sense. Saskatchewan's borders are all straight lines, and nobody lives there. Saskatchewan. Easy to draw, hard to spell. Well, the decision of Inurchuk, the governor of the Khwarezmian city of Ottara, to attack Genghis Khan's trade caravan was pretty bad. Khan was famous as a ruthless warlord, not the sort of guy you want to piss off, but maybe they could have got away with it. Genghis sent 3 ambassadors to negotiate a settlement, which is when Muhammad II, the Shah of Khwarezm, made the really bad decision to kill one of these ambassadors and send the other 2 back without their beards as a sign of humiliation. Genghis Khan was so enraged he assembled an army and destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire. Wiped out every town they had. He even rerouted a river to wipe out the village where the Shah was born, wiping it off the map. By 1120 there wasn't much of anything left, so both Inurchuk or Muhammad II of Khwarezm qualify. Take your pick. Link in description. Rerouted a river? Do you know how mad you gotta be at someone to reroute a fucking river? That's amazing. My nuts are twisted. Oh, he was mad, alright. The Mongols seized Ottara, which must have been particularly satisfying for Genghis Khan, given it was the same city that Inurchuk governed. In a brutal conquest, Genghis Khan had most of the civilians either massacred or enslaved, and he executed Inurchuk by pouring molten silver into his eyes and ears. Real Game of Thrones stuff. You mean goatee is real Genghis Khan stuff? The Dothraki are clearly based on the Mongol hordes. I don't see it. Not the worst in the world, but apparently my family owned a little town west of Kent, UK. My great-great-great-grandfather got plastered one night and gambled it all away. I feel your pain. My grandfather was a Vietnamese millionaire, but didn't have the time to teach my parents how to run our businesses before he died, so we lost all our money. Hey, let's create a coffee machine that uses a single-use plastic cup for every cup of coffee or tea. How bad can the trash from that really be? I actually read that the creator of the K-Cup, John Sylvan, regrets inventing the pod system. How about the guy who bought 20,000 Albanian slaves, brought them to Cairo, trained them to be the greatest warriors of their time, and then got overthrown by said slave warriors because they were so well trained? Link in description. Time Suck podcast about Napoleon Bonaparte is where I got this from. It's a good one if you have an hour to listen. Link in description. Warning. Task failed successfully. Alcibiades was considered a traitor in Athens for leading his men to death, a traitor in Sparta because he got the queen to cheat on the king with him, and a traitor in Persia after including them in a war. Edit. So I did a little bit of info and the switching sides and stealing statistics are also true, plus he is a bisexual. Not like there is anything wrong with bisexuality. Yeah, but he got away with it and had fun. And in the end that's all that really matters. Kaiser Wilhelm II firing Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck had a plan. He always has a plan. But not when an incompetent Kaiser boots him out of his means of putting his plans into action. Bismarck had everything set up perfectly, but Wilhelm II decided to fuck up everything he had set up, and got into WWI for it. Bismarck told Wilhelm what works out to, hey, idiot, you'll lose all that you hold in 20 years. Bismarck also predicted World War I being started by some damned fool thing in the Balkans. Well, having just watched Chernobyl, I was wondering how far down this thread I'd have to go to find Anatoly Dyatlov. You can't find him, because he is a graphite roof. Alright gentlemen, we've successfully fended off the Greeks for 10 years. Our great city of Troy still stands. If we keep this up, surely they will realize the siege is fruitless and return home before long. Yo captain, there's this big ass wooden horse outside. Oh rad, bring it in. The Donner Party of 90 pioneers choosing to take a shortcut when heading west from Illinois to California in 1846. Said shortcut led to them getting trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains and resorting to cannibalism. The Donner Party stupidity chose to take a shortcut that was sold to them by a conman over the strenuous objections of serious and thoughtful pioneer guides. History repeats itself. Yuppie tricked them into blazing the trail, and by blazing the trail, I mean spending 2 weeks to move a few miles, because you have to cut down every tree in your way. Oregon Trail doesn't do justice to how hard it is to move covered wagons, especially over mountains. Going downhill is a nightmare. Do you think oxen can walk backwards? It was hard even on the established trails to Oregon, but blazing your own trail was insanely hard, and the Donner Party was just made up of regular folks. Delicious regular folks. The seasoned survivors would taste better. Brutus decided to join Cassius in murdering the dictatorial tyrant, Caesar. The reason? They suspected his intent to become a king, which then started a chain of events leading to his adopted son Caesar becoming a military dictator without equal, having all the powers of a king without being called one. When this Caesar Augustus dies, his name and title is passed on for the next 400 years, almost like you would a crown. Monarchies then returned all over Europe, in the style of Augustus Caesar, and so, the decision of Brutus to join the conspiracy in effect changed all of Western civilization for the next 1900 years to adopt the very political style he wanted to avoid. It would not be until the 1770s when America and later France would begin revolting and experimenting with democracies and republics. You forgot that the Netherlands and Venice the first to go without a king. Also there was Novgorod, but they were far removed from Western Europe and conquered by Muscovy/Russia before their ideas spread, but they were a republic also. Happy Cake Day. Mao Zedong's revolutionary campaign, the Great Leap Forward, resulting in millions of people starving to death. Mao's Great Leap down the staircase. Whoever said the world's biggest MMO RuneScape should remove the wilderness and free trade, they threw a literal fortune down the drain, just because they didn't understand their own product. There's no more Wildy, and you can't trade with other players now? There wasn't. For a time, the Wildy became a kinda hostile NPC zone, while trading was limited to equal value give or take a token amount. Over time the restrictions have been removed back to good old days, but the damage was done. Damage is too far gone. So many hours chopping wood, man. Let's invade Russia, must somewhere up the list, twice. Except for Genghis Khan. He came from the east, cheater. I'm gonna do what's called a pro-gamer move. Going up against a Sicilian, when death is on the line. Either the Great Leap Forward, or the time I had gas station sushi. The Great Sit Downward. Hitler, who wants to fight a two-front war. Hitler was well aware of this, which is why he dealt with France first. In his opinion it was always about a war in the east. Hitler didn't play Risk as a child. Everyone knows you can't hold on to Asia. 7 extra guys at the start of every round, but you can never hold on to it. The first human by deciding to not live in a tree. And honestly, I'm still not entirely sold on this whole leaving the oceans thing. Jessica Biel not naming her child Batmo. Batmo Timberlake? This guy. Murdoch double-crossing Rambo, obviously. I'm coming for you. Anatoly Dyatlov making sure with every step that reactor 4 at Chernobyl exploded in 1986. This person is delusional. Take him to the infirmary.